Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. It is showtime. Welcome in. It's on the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast, the daily edition. We're coming down to the last few days of this election campaign here in Ontario. We record this at just after 3 o'clock on the 25th day of February. So there's about a day and a half of cajoling and campaigning yet to do. And whether or not that's going to make a huge difference in the numbers right now, as we've said over the last few days, it would appear that the Liberals are making some gains at the expense of the NDP and maybe the Conservatives, but the real fight between the Conservatives and the NDP will be the ones to watch as we head towards Election Day. Everything's been tariffs. Everything's been Trump. We know that. And so we really haven't got a chance to talk about some of the other larger issues like healthcare, like housing, etc. But I thought today what we should do is let's put that tariff label on some of these larger issues, particularly on social services, on housing, poverty, those things that really are the issues where we live on a daily basis. So around the table today, we welcome in Gerard Kennedy's here, of course, a former MPP and MP, Minister of Education, but brings his former experience as the head of the Daily Bread Food Bank here in Toronto. And we have our friend Neil Hetherington, CEO at Daily Bread as well. And Pedro Barata is from Habitat for Humanity Canada, 7 months or so in that new role as leading that team. And, I just think as we look at all of this, and Pedro, I'll start with you because the other day we were talking about the housing issue specifically, and Tim Hudak was on, and he, of course, was the head of the Ontario Real Estate Association for a period of time, and his group, he's just recently left there. He's now at Council Public Affairs, but Aurea was something less than kind, shall we say, in terms of pronouncing on the Ford government's record around housing. And it astounds me at so many levels how that ball got dropped here in this part of the world, because every other province is building more, getting ready to provide more support for affordable housing. You've got the national view. What do you think?
Well, I don't think the problem is just in Ontario. And in fact, if you look at how short various governments have fallen from their own targets, and that even the targets that we have set in Canada and Ontario for the housing that we need fall far short of what's actually required. We'd actually need to probably triple the level of building that we're going to do to just keep up with what's needed. But Ontario, because that is the focus of the debate today, has fallen short in terms of the targets that we set, and that's a real problem. And you see that, right across the board. You see that with, younger families that are trying to get a toehold in a housing market and just can't. You see that with renters who are, seeing a huge chunk of their incomes being rededicated to just their housing costs alone, which of course eats into everything else. We're also not seeing much progress on, the core issue of homelessness and the housing first approach that's required to really, get at the root causes of why people are unhoused. So there's a lot of room to make up, and to the credit of governments, this was an issue that we just sort of left behind in terms of continuing to build up the right supply, to make sure that we repair the current stock of affordable housing, also to make sure that people actually have money in their pockets to keep up with rent and mortgage. So it's a whole ball of wax that we just kind of forgot about for a very long time. Now governments are trying to play catch up. And of course, it's really, really hard, especially in the context that we find ourselves. And fortunately, that has not been top of mind in terms of this election.
Well, Gerard, it reminds me of the conversation we have about healthcare, and housing isn't quite there yet, but it's almost as if you'd have to break the healthcare system to actually fix it. You can't just incrementally fix it as we go. Are we getting to that point with housing?
Well, I think if there is something that's broken, it's the bubble maybe in the prices of housing. I think that's part of the issue. And there's a lot of things that happen when we allow, if you look at the numbers, there is no economic reason for our housing prices to be as high as they are. So that's a factor. I think what it also does is distort, because then it draws in the kind of investors that sometimes want to do hit and run, and I wouldn't say a condo is a hit and run, but I'm just saying that it when you see that kind of acceleration, it changes the complexion of the market. And I think it's harder for governments to be on top of that. I think the fact that there's no rental control is a similar thing on the rental side. So I think what looks to be unfixable is we've got wrong things in place. And we got to call ourselves out. Everybody who owns a home is sitting on something, and they hope it's for their retirement or their kids or themselves or whatever, but it's somebody else's expense. The access point, like if you look at the actual cost of rent, not terrible in Toronto compared to other large centers, but if you look at the entry point, what's the cost if you don't have a place? If your family broke down, if you lost your job and you had to find a new place, that's double. And so that's historically really high. So I don't want to say everything's broken and we can't fix it and it'll take forever. I don't believe that. In my experience, housing markets can turn around quite quickly. When people can't afford, prices come down. When people think it's invulnerable, that's when it's not. So I don't know where that inflection point is, but I would like to see, obviously it talked about a lot more. A day and a half before the election, we're not going to get very much good dialogue about it. But hopefully if we talk about changing what we care about to be able to go skinny and deal with the US and maybe take on, as a quote Stephen Harper, take on whatever level of damage we need to do. It's not, we're going to buffer the people at the bottom. We've done a horrible job of that coming out of COVID. And the provincial government, I think, has done a particularly terrible job of even looking there. Their welfare numbers are down. The amount of work that they do have some extra money against homelessness, which is good, but they're really allowing the Habitats and the food banks and the others to pick up the slack without any political, so far, price to pay.
Well, Neil, you and I have talked a lot over the last few years, and particularly through pandemic. There's not a lot of slack in your organization that allows you to do any more heavy lifting.
There's been a lot of strain, and it's because there haven't been those investments in housing, and for the large part. You look at after World War II, Canada was building 600,000 houses per year. That number now is about 200,000. While the population is increasing at a rate that is even greater than that, and every condition for the private developers to build rental has been provided to them, whether it's the removal of rent controls from 2018 on, or low interest rates at the time, and abatements on property tax. Every sort of tool, GST reductions, has been provided, yet we haven't built it. I think the province said they were going to build some 125,000 houses per year, and we were at about 80,000. So it does require us to remove our dependence just on the private sector to have that development happen and ensure that we are building homes. And as Pedro said, repairing homes and advocating for the retention of affordable housing. And when you do that, then hopefully the lineups outside of food banks will start to decrease. We all promised one another that we would build back better after COVID, and we didn't. And I worry very, very much about the lineups that, should the tariffs come in on March 4th, it looks like they're going to, how quickly a group of individuals who don't have the resiliency, the economic resiliency, will be able to get by without having to depend on charity in order to feed their family.
Well, you're in the business of affordable housing, not just the housing supply, though, Pedro. And I think we too quickly just say, well, we're just going to build more houses. Well, and it's great if you can, build more houses and somebody can make $1 million by selling it. But the affordability conversation gets diluted in a hurry. And I'm going to suggest that this happens, and not to blame anybody, but you and Neil are a victim of your own success, so to speak. And not only the willingness, but the ability to pick up the slack that Gerard has identified. At what point are you having, or any conversation with government agency, et cetera, to say, we need to be out of this business and you need to help us get out of this business?
I think that's a conversation that's been pretty much front and center in terms of just the immensity of the challenge, and the need for public policy to lead the way. And of course, not-for-profits can be a part of the solution, but we can never do government's job. And I think that one of the things that governments have gotten right, in if you could say that, is a real focus on how far we fell behind on just like the supply of purpose-built rental, and really putting the focus on that and inviting the private sector in to be part of the solution. It takes time. But it's an area that was just crying for attention, and that's been where a lot of the policy and a lot of the investment has gone. But what has happened as a result of that is that, from a policy-making point of view, we've taken our eye off of the other parts of the combination lock that really need to be in place for this issue to get the comprehensive solution that it requires. And I mean, great, we're really focused on purpose-built rental, but affordable home ownership is becoming worse and worse in terms of access. And in terms of homelessness, we're also not seeing the kinds of solutions that are going to get to the root causes of why people are unhoused and what we need to do to get them out of that situation. And there's also typically we don't talk enough about the relationship between incomes and housing, right? And this is a real policy, like a policy wall that we have to break down. For a number of reasons. One, because we can build housing, but that's going to take time. And in the meantime, people are struggling now, and they're going to continue to struggle. And they're going to struggle at a scale that building more supply is not going to be able to address in the next decade. So thinking about the interrelationship between the housing that we need to build and how long that's going to take, but at the same time, the struggles that people are having right now to pay their rent, to pay their mortgage, to pay their bills, and thinking about housing solutions not just as bricks and mortar, but also as income supplements that can really help people make ends meet. It's also, by the way, absolutely core, if we're ever going to address homelessness, that we think about income solutions that allow people to get in the door, literally, in terms of their first home, and being able to support people with rent supplements while they go through that transition. And unfortunately, the housing conversation really tends to ignore the income side too much, in my opinion.
Well, it just illustrates, Gerard, that this is not a siloed conversation. You have to have this sort of peripheral vision of the whole thing to see how this is going to play out, or if in fact we're going to get to solution. But as the more we talk about this particularly, it sounds as, I know we have to do hard things. We have to be willing to do hard things. It sounds to me more and more like we have made this a hard thing that we don't want to do.
You know what? I would argue opposite. I think we took all the easy paths. I think we've let distortions come in. If we had a set line and said, we don't want to punish our seniors, everybody hands up, we don't want to punish our seniors. We don't want unemployed people to have to line up on College Street every week to get some of their food. Okay, well, that sounds stupid. So we wouldn't want to do that. They're less productive people. But we're doing these things because the questions don't get put. We don't have communities that say, should everybody get to live here if they make an effort, if they do things on their own behalf? Shouldn't they be able to live here? Like, especially if they paid their taxes and are seniors, or if they're people that are working and are in those jobs that other people may not want to have. Can't they live without this friction? And by taking our eye off the ball, I would say, is how we've allowed that to happen. And so we've taken the easy path each time. These are distortions of market forces, and they're also lack of willpower on the part of the rest of us to say, how are we doing as a community? If certain people can't live here without being harmed, without their futures being cut off, without there being encampments, without there being a lot of hidden homeless, and so on. And it's all fine and good, I guess, if we're going to be whack-a-mole, and the government's doing it too. It's not just the visible habitats and food banks. The government's got $780 million dedicated for homelessness. It's not going to add one housing unit. It's all going to be rent supplements and trying to sort of whack-a-mole, but we're not really coming down to the conversation we need to have, which is, if we want to live in a decent place, then we have to make trade-offs, and trade-offs of people who are not powerful, who don't get to, be in front of decision makers. And that has to be a lot more part of our agenda. Food bank demand came down by half. The number of people that are homeless compared to 2005 is down 46% up until the pandemic, but it's gone up again. Both of them have gone up quite a bit. But the action on the part of government and the action on the part of society, because I wouldn't say government's got to solve everything, but the action on the part of society has not really changed to the reality that we're, again, sort of back in the ditch here. And I think for cities like Toronto, it's just too easy. It's too easy for us to not pay attention. If the alarm bells aren't going off, these quiet noises just don't get paid attention to. And yet, average people that live here do care about them. And so we've got to find some way to funnel the fact that we live in a community of decent people that are now having to step over young people on the streets, on the grates and so on, replacing some of the older people. And there's a whole range of things going on that if people knew about, they wouldn't be very happy with it. So is that leadership? Is that just a sensibility? Is there too many things going on at once after the pandemic? I don't want to be philosophical here, but I do think it's all fixable. I've never seen a problem that doesn't get addressed when people care about it. And so focus caring, a little bit of that can come from the not-for-profits, but maybe we need some new mechanisms, because clearly our system is not throwing these things up, and we all have to shrug or feel worse. One really interesting thing about Toronto, and I know that we're talking about Ontario, but it's true about some other cities too, is huge numbers of people have left. So that's an interesting kind of vote on what kind of place we live in, when the people who can, the people who want to have kids and want to live in a decent place, they have left in record numbers. What does that say about the place and those of us left behind? And so I think, unfortunately, this snap election, this tricky election, I think there'll be some common sense pushback on the part of people, but not enough. And so these kind of things will continue to happen. We should have had a debate about this. First pandemic election, what's not right? Who deserves our attention? Not just the things that make us afraid, like hallway. We don't want to be in that emergency room hallway. I was there with someone not long ago. It's not a great place to be, right? And maybe you're not going to get the right care. And maybe there's going to be slippage there on behalf of someone that you really care about. That's a fear-based thing. We got to be somewhere else. We got to be community building, and people got to care. And I know they care. We got to channel that. This election isn't allowing us to do it, in a right way. Mr. Ford would pay a little bit of a price, at least for that, so we can continue to have this discussion.
Neil, though, it touches on what Gerard was just talking about is, yes, and a lot of this has been amplified or exacerbated because of our pandemic experience. And my own sense of this is that there's a level of anxiety baked into that experience, but there's a fatigue that we're still feeling. And to Gerard's point, it's not that people don't care about the homeless. It's this, I can't cope with this anymore in a really comprehensive way, and I have to tune it out. You're on mute.
Well, I hope
we can give Charley a credit, by the way, if you want.
Thank you. I would like that. He's rather vocal. I hope they don't tune it out. And if they tune it out, then we won't have policy change. As Gerard was saying, every single food bank visit is a policy failure. And so the numbers are there, the stories are there, the lineups are there. We just need, we just need that sense of, for God's sake, care. And the policy alternatives are present. To Pedro's point on income, we know that those with disabilities are more adversely affected in terms of poverty. Have a disproportionate number of individuals who are in deep poverty. If you are on disability, you're legislated to be in deep poverty. And so we know, things like the Canada Disability Benefit could have the opportunity to address that. We made decisions decades ago to get out of cooperative housing nationally, and I think we're paying that price right now. But we're at that precipice where we have the opportunity to make policy decisions and changes. We do need to let our voices be known. The charitable sector, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, the food bank, shelters, we're not a substitute for good government policy. And then maybe touching back on the income side of things. Ford yesterday at his press conference was talking about 1 million new jobs have been created under their leadership. At the same time, we have gone from 500,000 food bank users in Ontario to 1 million food bank users in Ontario. In just a 2-year period, there's been that increase from 500,000 to 1 million. And so that speaks to the actual quality of those jobs that have been created, and the precarious employment and the lack of benefits as people cobble together 2 or 3 jobs or survive through a gig economy. And that is not allowing individuals to thrive in community. We have the choice, and I hope we make the positive ones, as Gerard said.
Where's the on the horizon then, Pedro? Because this is not sustainable. I mean, let's just face it. It doesn't matter how fixes or not. We're going to have to engage at a very intense level, some public movement on this. It can't just be on the backs of government and not-for-profits. Where's the breaking point here, do you think?
I think there are many, but I'll pick one, which is which we've touched on, which is how are we doing on just the intergenerational deal that we make from one generation to another. Gerard mentioned that there's increasing numbers of people leaving the province, and based on Habitat's own research, we're finding that especially the next generation is having a really hard time seeing, the future of family formation, the future of buying a home, the future of having a career, and are having to make choices that are not their preferred choices, which is to live, in the community where they have contacts and supports and friends and already, a Rolodex, but have to move somewhere else entirely and start fresh. Because this just isn't a place where they can see that future opening up. And we're about to see a massive transfer of intergenerational wealth, of course, as boomers pass on their properties and their money to their kids. And I think that's going to replicate a lot of the inequality, the growing gap that we have right now. And I think that there's obviously something fundamentally not right with this notion that, if a generation works hard, if they do all the right things, then they will be able to build a good life. And for the next generation, especially, that is really falling apart. And I think that we have to look at ourselves as a society and ask, what is it that we're doing in terms of building careers, in terms of building incomes, in terms of building assets, in terms of a pathway to home ownership, in terms of delayed family formation, and what are we doing to support the next generation with everything from housing to childcare costs to child benefits. So I think that there's a reckoning that's coming, which is also tied to how we've relied on temporary immigration to fill some of our labor market gaps, which, now we're trying to sort of, swing the pendulum in the other direction. But that is going to put immense pressure on the next generation to figure out how to fill those labor market needs. So I think that conversation about what do we owe those who come next, and how is it that we ensure that they get an even better deal than the ones who were here before, I think that's a conversation worth having.
Gerard, if you look at that, sort of that generational effect, isn't that, or shouldn't it be viewed as an opportunity then? I mean, if there's that much generational wealth sitting there, to be able to say we need to incentivize it so that it's spent and applied effectively.
Look, I'm afraid I understand we got sort of some, not philosophical, but at least some big picture things that are going on. But policy is not that. I mean, having been on both sides of that table, it's practical stuff. And so, if we want to house young people or to equalize, we can. If we want to cap the housing market growth in prices or have influence on it, we can do that and start to make it increasingly affordable. There's all kinds of things we can do. Look at this gentleman named Mike Moffat out of London, looking at the amount of, de facto taxes, development fees that are being placed all around Ontario as a result from the municipalities as a result of not getting funding from the province. If we were debating that, there's a generational issue because the new houses, the starter homes, aren't getting built. You look at Alberta, where a lot of Ontarians are going because of affordability. They're not only exceeding their targets, they're making Ontario look very backwards in terms of their ability to build houses. So when a sector is frozen like that, there are solutions. And it's, and now I just give you started off, Dave, asking us about the tariff impacts and what it could do to some of our strained social infrastructure. It might help, frankly, because people are going to make policy and programs really quickly if the tariff harm is coming at us. And the thing that we need, though, is to be making a stronger argument that we don't do it at the expense of the most vulnerable in our society. Maybe it's the people working in some of the jobs that are not paying properly, that are not good, and we need to look at how we influence our employers to do better in some of those things. But we also we haven't had welfare rates up here increased since 2018. Which, given the inflation and given the cost of housing for new housing, is a guarantee. It's a ticket to not just to the food bank, it's a ticket to bad health. Now, we're all witness to that. You can't miss it. There are neighborhoods. At the end of my own street, there's a church where there are people lined up all the time. Are we getting normalized? Are we taking a discount? Well, Mr. Trump, I hate to mention his name. I don't think he deserves our considered attention all the time like he's getting. But he is at least challenging us more directly. And maybe out of that, we can come up with better answers here. It doesn't take a generation to fix things. People can get their attentions focused. And I think that what has to be done is a claim for decency, a call on that caring that really is out there. And people describing, okay, here's the buffers we're going to put in place. We could have some heavy water here. What is our vulnerability? And our vulnerability right now is everything that we've been talking about, but where are the practical measures? A longer election campaign might have allowed that to come up. The people can still, when they cast their ballot in a couple of days, they can go for who they think might have some of those considerations higher up the list, because it's what we're going to need to continue to live in a place where we can hold our head up high and say, this is where our kids want to live. Yes, they're going to be leaving generationally, but also they want to be given hope. And hope comes from action, not talking, not doing things. Every little thing that gets a bit better. I'm working with some homelessness organizations right now, and there's a way to get at homelessness in schools. And I'm not going to overtalk that because it's not my place. But there's a bunch of things that can be done. They're practical and they need to be gotten at. And that's what people need. The more despair people have, the more they need things to be done on their behalf, but with them as well. So I'm not going Pollyannish on this. It's a tough go we're headed into. And the premier came out and I'm going to protect you. Well, his track record on protecting healthcare, people that are been exited out of their homes into encampment stuff isn't good. I want to be very objective about this. And we're not maybe going to resolve that, but hopefully that sense is going to get carried forward, because everybody's going to have to move pretty quickly in the changed economic environment that could come from jobs being shook up by tariffs. But look at people; they're determined. Go shopping, see them in the hallway, in the aisles, looking at where the products are made from. They're just looking for that leadership. They just want the practical things they can do. They don't want people to be hurt. They want us to keep what's important about Canada, and they don't want to give up the things that really matter. And they'll go a fair distance to do it. They're being underestimated right now by our politicians, but I really feel that's going to come out. It doesn't matter what government's in there. new things are going to happen.
Well, part of that, Neil, is, that whole issue of shopping, buy Canadian, et cetera. And there's been a number of pieces written lately on it. And one that I saw a couple of days ago was talking about, I went in, made the effort. It wasn't necessarily all that hard. It just took attention and time. But it added $6 or whatever to my grocery bill. And my question is, that's just a small part of the hard thing that we're going to have to do. We're all going to have to somehow pay for this. And are we willing to put $6 more into our groceries on a weekly basis, or whatever it happens to be, if that's what it's going to take? Because we're already paying a hell of a lot more for groceries than we were 6 months ago.
Well, yeah, I don't think we'll necessarily have a choice about it. Sylvain Charbois talks about the fact that if you look at all the food that is grown and manufactured in Canada, it only equates to about 10% of the food that we have. It is shockingly low, the number. So that's grown and manufactured. And so we can anticipate significant financial repercussions on that front. And to your earlier point with Pedro, in terms of, are we at this breaking point? The answer is yes. The news 2 months ago that the Ottawa Food Bank was having to cut back the amount of food that they distribute by 50%. That there were layoffs last month at the Mississauga Food Bank. That there has been this dependence on the charitable sector to pick up the pieces, and for us here at the Daily Bread Food Bank, that just means that we are going to use that energy that we have to be able to advocate harder for the very straightforward policies that align with the Canadian values we espouse. That those values are going to translate into purchasing Canadian, so that hopefully we start to bring our manufacturing back. It saddens me that our Daily Bread is right beside, or was right beside, the Campbell's Soup factory, and now if you get a Campbell's Soup, it was made in Mexico or it was made in the States. We've lost significant manufacturing in food. We're going to pay a price for it. Hopefully it's on a temporary basis if in the midterm we start to bring some manufacturing back. So maybe there's some opportunity down the road. The other opportunity, or the hopeful side, that I'll just echo again, is there will be, with the tariffs, some estimated $100 billion that will come into federal coffers, and my hope is that gets translated to decent, affordable housing. That it gets put into not just short-term measures to help Canadians immediately because they're going to need it, but in terms of long-term policy alternatives that, let's be frank, they cost money, and we need to put those investments in place.
So I want to get into the cost specifically on housing vis-a-vis the tariffs, but Pedro, as has been described, and Gerard puts it so well in terms of this sense that you need to make sure that we're taking care of those who are in need of care right now. That works against you in some respects, because if we've got people who can't afford a house already, and there's a significant demographic out there who can't afford housing but have jobs and all those sorts of things, it makes your model all the more difficult to support in some respects, because those are the people you would want to come out and support Habitat. But if they can't get a house on their own, then there would be a certain mentality to say, well, I got to take care of me first. I love what you're doing at Habitat. How do you cope with that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that again with the next generation of young professionals who in normal circumstances, even a decade ago, would have been able to put a down payment together and just afford a mortgage and get their foot in the door in terms of buying their first home. Now, the next generation, unless they have rich parents, has been shut out of the market. There are very few market solutions if you want a family starter home that you can afford. And we are being asked to step into that void and to bring, the Habitat ingenuity, the Habitat model, to figure out a way to cut costs and to provide more options for a brand new swath of the population, right? That 10 years ago did not have this problem and now does and is looking for solutions. Of course, that stretches, that grows our own market, if you will, in terms of people looking for homes. But of course, it puts stress on our ability to serve our core mission, right? And to serve those who need deeper affordability, right? And who are going to be really shut out unless we come up with some solutions. So if we're going to take more action on the affordability side, we have to look at practical solutions, as Gerard says. I mean, right now, taxes and fees take up 25% of new starts. That is a huge wall to climb if you're trying to build attainable or affordable housing, alongside, what's happening with the supply chain, the building costs, interest rates, just the lack of trades labor. All of that is compounded unless we start to look at, how is it that we can take action in these areas. And it's interesting that, every party, if you look at their platforms, is actually put forward a backstop plan, a plan to counter potential tariffs in the impacts on Ontarians, and has also put forward pretty significant housing plans. So those are there to be activated. We did learn from the pandemic that it is possible to act quickly with policy that backstops some of the impacts on the economy and protects people when they need that help the most. And in many ways, some of those supports really worked, right? They provided a new safety net that wasn't there before to ensure that a lot of people didn't fall through the cracks. And we saw all kinds of positive outcomes coming out of that, from like housing affordability to poverty rates actually coming down. But of course, those were short-lived. So what is it that we take from that experience in the pandemic, with all of the plans that are on paper from all the parties, to be able to backstop and make sure that we're responding to the needs of employers, of industry, of everyday Ontarians? And can we actually make the move to not just look at those as one-time investments, but as down payments for just a different way forward? What we used to call building back better, right, during the pandemic.
Well, I just want to pick up on that, because it all makes sense in as much as, there's a thoughtful, step-by-step solution. There are ways to get to an answer. But I recall, was it about just over a year ago, the conversation in Toronto was Habitat for Humanity is talking about folks who can't afford houses. They had to have a household income of $100,000 before they qualified for the Habitat plan. Where's that number now? And again, I go back to, this makes it all the more difficult to engage that demographic to support Habitat in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. You get to compounding land costs, interest rates, inflation, supply chain, fees and charges in terms of building a new house. And of course, building a house gets more and more and more costlier. To carry a mortgage on that house requires more and more and more income. So what are the policy levers that we need to have in place to both reduce the cost of building and also ensure that people have breaks and more income to be able to afford new homes, both at the attainable level as well as the affordable level?
But where does that land on your desk in terms of how does Habitat continue its mission and the success of its mission with that moving goalpost?
Well, we need public policy support. We cannot do it on our own, and so it has to go hand in hand. If we are now looking at stretching our mandate to serve a growing segment of the population with the same tools that we had before, right, and with even rising barriers in terms of the costs that it takes to build, we're not going to be able to tackle that on our own. But it begs the question: if we do care about the next generation, if we do care about the value of affordable home ownership, then how is it that all players can come around the table and figure out what's their stake in terms of making that possible? We know what our stake is. Our stake is, to build an affordable product, to work with families to make sure that they have a mortgage that they can afford, and to pull out all the stops to reduce the cost of building. But with just the reality of the market as it is right now, public policy has to step in and complement the work that we need to do more of.
But Pedro, can I just
go
add
ahead
on to that just a little bit? I mean, Habitat for Humanity has always, in Canada for the last 30 years or so, it's built between 200 and 300 houses. It's been, and that has been meaningful and important to that child who's moved from, an illegal basement apartment and crossed the threshold of a doorway of a brand new Habitat home. And that's important to each one of those families. But I think the real strength of Habitat for Humanity and why I love that organization as much as I do, it comes from the 12 or so thousand people who got to swing hammers and hear those conversations about affordable housing. And yes, affordable home ownership is more and more out of reach. But the idea of affordability, the idea of affordable housing, the idea that housing is on a continuum and requires policy change, I think that's an army right there, ready to go to be able to demand action on behalf of government, not take the place of government, but to have that experience working alongside that family who moves into that home to be able to say, hey, we need to do better.
So, Gerard, when we look at effects of tariffs, though, and the other part of the story is if tariffs lead to job loss leads to income loss. That makes the housing all less affordable. There was numbers from the folks at Coldwell Banker talking about an 11% rise in listings in Toronto in January of this year. And, stupid me, I thought, well, that's pretty good. There's more product out there, people can look for houses, and that brings the price down. But the analysis is that people are spooked by the tariffs, and they want to get in while the getting's good, and they want to sell off the property while they can get the most bang for their buck.
Sure, but I actually think it's a propitious time. I think we're, honestly, the market has failed in Toronto, and I don't know all the builders the way that Neil, who used to be at Habitat, and Pedro does, and so on. And I know there's very many good people there, and I see nice collaborations like Options for Homes still delivering, homes for people. But clearly it's failed. And we, the participants in the market, have somehow got a distortion. I'm worried that with my little bit of economic training, it's going to be a bubble at an inopportune moment. So that's what I would worry about, because that would cause what we don't want, which is people to get worried and to panic. So I think when we put on the safety valves here, where we have to buckle up for at least 4 years of idiosyncratic behavior on the part of what was our major trading partner, then I think that allows us to get creative. And I think, but the first thing I'd like to see, because I think it was your point, Dave, at the beginning, is we need to circle the wagons around the most vulnerable, and that means that we got to pay for things for them, and allow them not to become more needy, not to become excessive users of health systems and people with incredible amounts of anxiety and so on. If you see the numbers coming out of the school board for young people right now, if we go younger than the people entrant to market, there's a heck of a lot of hangover there from the pandemic. So we got to give priority to our vulnerable people in order for us to take bolder measures and to be able to do things. So I think that's part of what Habitat can do because of their intimate kind of knowledge. I think it's what the food banks can do and say, here's not a red line, but here's the compassion line. Here's the conscience of the community in terms of where we can be. And we have to go with realistic things that can be done tomorrow, not 2030, not 2050, because people live grocery bill to grocery bill. And now, because the vulnerability is wider, the other people have to know how it's going to get buffered. Their chances are going to be, if they have the health, if they have their ability to move forward, how are we going to kind of improve those things? Because I think if we can take away the fear of the people suffering the most, we're going to have more things that we can do. Because I know it's Maslowian. If we're worried about ourselves, we may not worry about our neighbor. That's not what I've seen over my career in things. I've seen that people start worrying about their neighbor until something comes and bites them, right? And so we haven't tapped into that. Our public policy, that word gets used as if there's a magic wand. Public policy is what we want to make it. If we sit down and come up with good answers, they're going to get followed. The problem here is that we've got a market failure, just red lights flashing and nobody doing anything in Toronto about this wicked increase in an undeserved increase in housing prices over the last 10 and 15 years. And it's put a distortion on everything. But and then I think, and so you have a case now for rent controls, and you have a case now for some kind of interference with the cost of housing, but only when it becomes, say, offside. So I don't have the answer right now, but I think a bunch of people in the room will have answers. I think that the tariff situation is going to force people to overcome some of their biases and stop thinking in little boxes. And I look forward to that. I've seen it happen in the past in certain times. We got a child benefit. We got, a focus on, how to deal with certain sectors when we brought on free trade. And we smoothed out things for people because that's kind of what we should be doing. And it also helped keep all the rest of us with our confidence and feeling good about things. And I'm sensing out there, Canadians are not like the pandemic saying, oh, heck, when is this going to hurt me? They're saying, what do you want me to do? What should I do next? And so it's not government take care of this for me. It's what are we going to do? Tell it to me straight. What sacrifices will I have to make? And I think some of these other things that are way overdue can also come on the table now because people know we have to be acting together. If everything's fine, that's the problem part when 5% of the people are paying attention. What is the number of people? 80% of the people looking at their grocery purchase and where it's going to be coming from and where they're going to buy from. And I think that something that number, Neil, there's a lot more food that we consume comes from Canada, maybe not both grown and manufactured. But the fact is we got choices. People are going to exercise them. People are going to put those choices in front of people. Now, in an ideal world, we'd be debating choices we already came, and maybe some of them, Pedro, are deep in those housing platforms people have and the things that they're going to do, but they haven't been put in front of us. They haven't been put in front of the voters and say, do you like this? Vote for me. And maybe the answers aren't there, but that's what we got to push for. It's unfair, but the people who know the most, the habitats and the food banks, they got to do some of that for us. And then the rest of us have got to just, get involved because we can't have this many people living a separate society and not think it's going to have consequences. So I like the fact that this crisis could be turned into dealing with our slow crisis, the one that everybody has kind of been walking around. I think, I don't want to be optimistic for no reason. I just my feeling. And I think it will translate to action, whether we're part of it or other people are, it's going to happen.
Well, Neil, talking about, don't waste a good crisis. And I would agree generally, except, I think for the most part, we wasted a good crisis in the pandemic. But moving forward, and it's only going to be the next few weeks, once we get past the federal Liberal leadership election, we're likely to be into a federal election. So this conversation will, I think, continue. And is this the crisis that actually prompts a conversation around a guaranteed income?
Oh, I don't know. I wish I did, but I will say that this is a crisis that does come potentially, with the retaliatory tariffs. It does come with money that the government didn't have in the first crisis. So maybe that is the thing that gets it over the goalpost for other initiatives. I think the conversation will be there. I just don't see the political will for a guaranteed income. I do think that there are some other low-hanging fruit options that people will see immediate benefit from when it comes to things like the Canada Disability Benefit, when it comes to getting the government back into building housing. These are the types of things that I think there might be short, medium, and on the housing side, the long-term interest to build back better round two.
Well, maybe 1.02, something like
that.
Yeah,
I guess we found
I think it's underway, guys. I really do. I think it's underway, and it's a question of people tasking their energies, focusing on what can be done in the short run. And I think it's really important that vulnerable people get represented in that conversation, looking for pie in the sky things down the road. And I'm sorry, but guaranteed income, sure, build it. Let's build it. Let's say, hey, you're working and we want you to have a livable wage. What is that? And then, hey, let's list those companies that can't afford to pay it, and then let's subsidize them. But let's recognize that's not a very viable company if they're making people, they got to pick them up as temporary labor at 5 a.m, give them no benefits, and then let them go when they become eligible. So some of this, we can make these edges kind of sharp. What does it cost to live in Toronto? That's what we've been talking about the whole time. And what should that be kept at? What can we bring it down to? What are the measures that we do step by step, starting with the worst off? And I think that's what people will respond to. They don't want, nobody believes in a solution falling out of the sky, guaranteed annual anything. We don't have anything guaranteed in our lives. And you know what? The people who are going to food banks, the people who have had a chance to chat to quite a bit lately that are homeless, they don't want guarantees. They just want to get noticed. They want to be factored in. And it's very, very important when things are changing quickly that they get factored in, that there's loud noises being made on their behalf, respectful noises, things that they would want to say. And in fact, they should be the ones saying it, but somebody has to amplify that so that it comes forward. And I just feel more optimistic about that. I think things in healthcare and so on, where you've got so many people working, are harder than how do we keep people from being hungry? How do we keep people safely housed? Who's got to be mobilized? Who's got a piece of this to be done? And how do we keep families together, for example, for young people not to sort of seek the streets? How do we do other things? Those are things that don't require money. They require attitude and a can-do kind of feeling. And I believe that that's growing in Canada right now. The pandemic put us on our butts quite understandably. There was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, more people affected than we let on. Governments didn't know whether they should air all that and talk to people. I was giving out or in charge of some portion of medical testing, and we saw a lot of the problems in that healthcare system. We barely got through by the skin of our teeth. So fixing it, we did not make the same mistake twice. Let's talk about the problems as they're occurring, but let's put a priority on the problems for the people who are harmed the most, the people who are the least in the game right now. We will not be able to move forward, I'm sure, unless we make sure that they're counted and that they're factored in. They aren't in the election, but they hopefully will be in this very hectic time ahead, federal and so on. I see it as a fertile time. I hope a lot of people out there, maybe some of the people listening, will look for the opportunity to join in and be part of some kind of improvements and then eventually solutions, because you can't get a solution by snapping your fingers or stamping your feet.
Well, Pedro, just to wrap then, this tends to be a call for government and just society in general to really focus on multitasking, because we're going to have to do a whole lot more than one thing at a time to get any of this accomplished.
Yeah, and I mean, to build on the optimism of my colleagues around the call and looking forward to the federal election, I think that we were in danger of having an election about personalities, and not an election about ideas and the seriousness of the situation that we're in. And hopefully, and it looks like we are headed in that direction, the clear and present danger that we're all facing together with so many unknowns is pushing all of us to get beyond just, sort of like the veneer of the usual political game, and to really ask questions about, like, what's going on, what needs to happen, what are the responses that I can do, what is the governments need to do, what is the businesses need done, and hopefully on the heels of a provincial election, that's talked about some substantive issues to do with the tariff, the dangers of tariff and the impact on the economy and the most vulnerable. Hopefully we can carry that into a federal election, which really becomes, I won't say a dialogue, but a real debate over ideas and deep ideas that are about the response that I think Canadians are really looking for, but also a response that has a longer term impact in terms of the society that we want to create, and how is it that we want to take care of each other. So I'm hopeful that we're going to have a different level of debate. And I guess it's one of the silver linings out of this very unfortunate context that we're all living together.
Well, let's leave it there. And Pedro Barata at Habitat for Humanity, thanks for joining the show. and being in here for the first time. Gerard Kennedy is with us, and Neil Hetherington from Daily Bread Food Bank. And again, if you have some thoughts on the show and you want to leave us a comment, by all means do so. You can do that in the YouTube channel, on iHeart, on Spotify, Apple, etc. But we also have the talk back button if you want to go to my website, davetrafford.com, and just fire up the button there and let us know what you think. There's all kinds of really thoughtful comment on the YouTube channel. For those of you who spend a good deal of time typing it out, feel free, jump in and leave us your comment. And for those that are suitable, we'll be happy to include them in upcoming shows. All right. Well, that will do it for us. This is the Tuesday edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. It is the daily edition. We'll be here tomorrow with our cast, our comms and strategy team from Now and Next, to sit in, get their take on how the campaign has played out. And then the usual suspects around the table, Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, and John Wright, will be with us on Thursday, Election Day, and we'll just sort of set the day up, and then we'll have a final wrap on Friday. And then I might exhale. I think that would be a good thing to do. So thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. And again, if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave us a comment, subscribe to the show. I'm Dave Trafford. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.